Mr Abbott, thank you very much for your time. Can I start by asking you what makes a good king or a good sovereign?
The closer the resemblance to our late Queen, the better. And her life was a life of constant duty and service. Those fragrant words that she uttered on her 21st birthday, "My whole life, be it long or short, will be dedicated to your service and that of the great imperial family to which we all belong." She lived her entire life in accordance with that statement. And if any monarch wants to flourish and be absolutely beloved by his or her people, that's the way they've got to live. Now, I should say that King Charles hasn't put a foot wrong. He's conducted himself in an exemplary manner, and I think that the duty and service that marked his mother's life is very much in evident from our king, and I think he's going to turn out in office to be absolutely his mother's son.
There's something to be said about the oaths that they pledge. I was watching Her Majesty's coronation in full the other day, and there's a series of oaths, some of them obviously dating back to 1066 effectively, which are all about, you know, upholding the land, upholding the rule of law, upholding being the head of the church and looking to do the right by the people.
Of course. There's this shallow caricature of the royal family as somehow leading a privileged life. It's actually an incredibly burdened life. It is a life that almost from birth is one of duty and service. It's a life lived in a goldfish bowl. I can absolutely understand why occasionally some members of the royal family think the Duke of Windsor, think Prince Harry want to leave it, because it's not an easy life at all. It's an incredibly tough life, but if you can do it magnificently, as our late Queen did, well, you are an inspiration to the whole world.
I think maybe it was George Brandis who put to me, in some regards, a life of service and duty is perhaps a little lost on modern generations. It's almost an old-fashioned character trait.
There's no doubt that these are indulgent times, not dutiful times. And there is a sense in which the monarchy reflects a different spirit. But it's precisely because these are indulgent times that something which at its heart is not at all indulgent is so important and necessary.
Do you remember the first time you met Prince Charles?
I certainly had a very long meeting with him. Well, when I say a very long meeting, it was probably 40 minutes or so. In Colombo in 2013 at the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference. It was the first Heads of Government Conference from memory that the Queen did not herself attend, and sent Prince Charles in her place. I've got to say, Prince Charles is a highly intelligent, very knowledgeable, really impressive individual with a deep commitment to Australia as well as to the United Kingdom. And I very much enjoyed the talk we had. It was wide-ranging, it was candid, and I think quite a bit came out of it. And I'm very confident that King Charles will be somewhat different to Prince Charles. I entirely admired Prince Charles's work on architecture, for instance, on conservation. I must confess I sometimes thought he pushed the boundaries a bit on more contentious issues like climate. But as I said, he hasn't put a foot wrong since he's become king. And as indeed he told us himself some years back, he would have to be a somewhat different person, or at least he would have a somewhat different role as monarch than the role he was able to exercise, and I suppose the elements of individuality that he was able to bring to the role as Prince of Wales.
He famously criticised modern architecture, didn't he?
But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved and elegant friend.
Mr Brandis was telling a story about a charity event at Australia House not long after the bushfires, and he sat beside the Prince of Wales. Prince Charles asked him in effect about Australia's climate wars, and he said he spent 3 hours explaining the subtleties of the politics.
Well, he was absolutely absorbed. I mean, I remember I said to him, well, do you really want to know? Because if you want to know, I'm going to tell you.
Does that surprise you?
No, not at all, because I think that Prince Charles all his life was an incredibly conscientious person, a very sensitive person, and I mean, there are upsides and downsides to that, but this is someone who is extraordinarily interested in the people who he meets, the issues that he has to deal with, and I think he takes all of this very, very seriously, and that's to his credit.
You're a man who famously respects the monarchy and is quite proud of Australia's relationship. What's it like when you meet royalty for the first time?
It's a very good question. I suppose it's a bit like meeting anyone who is someone who is both famous and someone who you are very much inclined to respect and even to look up to. I recall the one really good and lengthy meeting I had with Her Majesty the Queen. The time absolutely flew because she was just so incredibly engaging, and she spoke so knowledgeably and freely, and she wasn't in any way bland or superficial, and yet she wasn't party political or particularly judgmental or dogmatic. And I guess that's what comes from a lifetime of duty and service and a disposition to try to see the good in people and in situations without pretending that all is well in some kind of impossibly Panglossian optimism.
Lovely. I know when I was covering Her Majesty's passing in London, better part of 6 months ago, I was lost sometimes for how to describe this institution. There almost needs to be a word bigger than institution to describe the royal family, the monarchy, its role within Australia.
In all sorts of ways, I think that the monarchy is part of society. The monarch, depending upon the individual, I suppose, and the circumstances, can become assimilated into one's own life. I mean, the Queen, for instance, because she was there for so long, and because she was so invariably a comforting and uplifting presence, I think it cemented herself into the, I suppose, mental hemispheres of so many people. And that's why I think so many people were so incredibly moved when she was finally gone, because she had been there for so long. I certainly didn't expect to be as moved as I was. I think there's a spiritual dimension to the monarchy. I think the monarchy brings elements of ritual and ceremony, which we mostly lack in the modern world, but still deep down need if we are to have fulfilling and well-developed lives.
Your Majesty, Mummy, as a nation, this is our opportunity to thank you and my father for always being there for us.
A long life can pass by many milestones. My own is no exception. But I thank you all, and the many others at home and overseas, for your touching messages of great kindness.
In some regard, being the head of the Anglican, the Protestant faith, there is a papal element too, isn't it? It's not just a sovereign. I mean, there is a religious relevance too.
The fact that the Queen, our late Queen, was such a serious, if not especially demonstrative or preachy Christian, I think was very important to her, and I think it had an impact on the wider world as well. Prince Charles is obviously conscious of the, I suppose, multiplicity of faiths in the modern world, including in modern Britain, and has at different times talked about being defender of faith as opposed to defender of the faith. But again, I think this is a sign of his awareness of contemporary reality and desire to reach out as much as he humanly can, consistent with the institution, to the diversity of modern Britain and indeed the modern Commonwealth.
Tell me what you think his connection to Australia means to him. Obviously he came here as a very young boy and then he was in some regards schooled here.
And I suspect that the time he had as a kind of a teacher's aide at Timbertop was a very formative time. He would have been more independent then and there than at any previous time in his life. He would have been less in a goldfish bowl there and then than at any previous time in his life. And I suspect the comparative informality and easygoing nature of Australia would have been a tonic and a breath of fresh air to him. So I'm sure we have played our part in shaping the man that he is today, and I'm confident that it's been an uplifting part.
And you said he was described as a pommy bastard more times than he cares to remember.
Yeah, and thank God we're a no-nonsense people.
Yeah.
We don't stand on ceremony, even with the heir to the throne.
I've been through my fair share of being called a pommy bastard, I can assure you.
Can you tell me why the monarchy isn't an anachronism?
Look, the Crown is an ancient yet continually evolving institution. The King, who was an absolute ruler centuries ago, then became a kind of chairman of the governmental board, and now a constitutional monarch is a gracious presence with moral power but no executive authority other than in extremely rare circumstances. The thing has changed, but it's very much changed with us. The monarchy has evolved as society has changed over the centuries. But the great thing is that the presence of the Crown in our public life keeps some part of our system free of politics.
Yeah.
And as a politician, obviously, I appreciate the good things that politicians can do and the importance of politics, but I think it's a real help that there is something at the apex of our system which is not tainted with partisanship. I mean, I'm an admirer of the United States, but I reckon there'd be many times, particularly recently, when the Americans would think, I wish we still had the Crown in our system, instead of the feuding individuals that are at the apex of it.
When we look at the line that Great Britain currently treads with perhaps modern political correctness, the stone of Scone, which has been taken from Scotland and will be put in the chair, the Koh-i-Noor diamond, I think it's called. What line do you think the modern United Kingdom, or perhaps the modern monarchy, has to tread, considering today's social precariousness?
The societies that work best are those that evolve rather than those that are subject to major discontinuities, major upheavals. And Britain and the other English-speaking societies have been the preeminent evolutionary societies of the world. We haven't been subject to revolution. We haven't been subject in 1,000 years to conquest. We have evolved successfully because we haven't assumed that we have the last word in wisdom. We've been prepared to learn, to adapt, to assimilate, and the monarchy has been very much a part of that. In some ways, it's embodied all of these changes that have taken place.
Well, can I take you to history? You talk about being free of politics. Interesting that King Charles has taken his own name. If you go back at Charles I famously lost his head because he in effect governed without his parliament. So he was a bit of a tyrant. You had the intermediary years, we had Oliver Cromwell and the Civil War, the Second Civil War for the United Kingdom, and eventually they turned back to Charles's son, Charles II, and they brought back the monarchy, albeit with less power. What do you think Charles III will be remembered for?
Well, let's hope he's remembered for being a worthy successor to his wonderful mother. I guess it depends upon what's for us. Events, dear boy, events. That's really what makes or breaks people.
When you think of all the experiences you've had as a politician, as a minister, as a prime minister, in some regards working with trade overseas, it would be rather incredible to think that you would be coming to the pinnacle of your career, which is what Charles is doing now in his 70s. How do you think that shapes a man, or how would that shape you?
Gives younger people something to look forward to.
And perhaps something to respect.
Absolutely. Look, I've never really liked this cult of youth. As long as people have got reasonable health and have kept their enthusiasm, the more experience they've got, the better they are. And King Charles is in perfectly good health. He obviously revels in the job he's doing. He's got a wonderful Queen by his side. And I think the fact that he hasn't come down in the last shower doesn't imagine that what's happening today is absolutely unique and has never happened in any similar respects before. I think that's all to the good.
Can I ask, are you going to be in attendance? Will you at least be over in the United Kingdom?
Look,
you're well connected.
Sadly, I won't be. Like billions of other people, I'll be glued to my television screen.
Through the park, where every tree is a grandstand, it's mile after mile of swinging men and prancing horses. And amongst the glittering uniforms and waving plumes, not the smallest corner of the empire is forgotten.